So, a commenter asked me, why did Charles Murray vote for Joe Biden? And I think we have to state that the basic premise is that Charles Murray is he's some sort of a sociologist, he's a social scientist, and he researches things like IQ, and he is nominally a conservative, and he hangs out with Bill Kristol, who's nominally in some ways labels himself a conservative. So the question becomes, like, if he's a conservative, he's a social scientist, he's interested in research into intelligence, why does he support Joe Biden over Trump? And really, when you get down to it, the most vulgar issue at hand here is what's going on with the black community, and how is American politics, how does it relate to black issues? So there are a lot of these people out there who cite Charles Murray, and they cite Richard Lynn, and they cite these types of people as having done the intelligence research and having found out that, for example, the assumptions underlying LBJ's Great Society, or the assumptions underlying affirmative action, or the assumptions underlying this or that, that they're skeptical of that, or they're providing some sort of open-ended interpretation. And so just the general gist that people get out of this, these right-wing people, they're coming out of this Sean Hannity, Bill O'Reilly, Ann Coulter type of political nexus, and they're saying, we don't like welfare, we don't like this racial resentment, we want to go back to some conception of color blindness. We want to go back to some conception of freedom of association. And we believe that because Charles Murray is going out and he's providing some kind of conservative alternative to the mainstream sociology, that somehow that necessarily puts him on the side of Trump rather than Biden. And there's a problem with this. There's a problem with this. The facts about the black community are not really so much in dispute. What's in dispute are the causes. What's in dispute are the causes, and what's in dispute are the incentives, the results, and the consequences. So everybody knows about statistics. Everybody knows about out-of-wedlock births. Everybody knows about drug use. Everybody knows about incarceration rates. Everybody knows about dropout rates. Everybody knows about this. And usually, when the bleeding heart liberals, so to speak, I don't actually believe they're bleeding heart, I believe they're sociopaths, but when the college professor, sociologist, comes out and talks about critical theory and states all these facts and unpacks white privilege, people hear that and they say, oh, well, they're marshaling all of these facts in order to engage in some kind of socialistic wealth redistribution along racial lines. But when Charles Murray says it, he doesn't come at it with that type of moralistic religious fervor, and therefore it's interpreted as, oh, well, if you're not on the side of the mainstream sociology, then you must be against them. Then you must be saying that these problems are internal rather than external. So that's the debate about the causes, right? Are these problems a result of internal causes or external causes? So the mainstream academia will tell you that the main problem, and this is the focus behind BLM, is the main problem in the black community right now is policing, is that you have police officers who are either white or who have adopted the uniform of white. They'll have black police officers and they'll say, well, if you put on a police uniform, you're embodying or internalizing white privilege and white supremacy. And so they say that's the biggest problem. And when you ask people who are involved on the street level, protesters, people actually go there and throw stones at windows or just march peacefully. I mean, out of 100 people, you only need one person to throw a stone. Out of 100 people, you only need one person to set a car on fire. it really is, at the end of the day, oh, it's a peaceful protest, what a joke. No, actually, the vast majority of people are peaceful. It is a small number who are actually violent. Now, in terms of theft, all it takes is 1 out of 100 to break a window into a store, and then the rest of the people, like lemmings, follow in, and then they steal. Stealing is a little bit different than violence, okay? We have to be nuanced about this. But when you ask the protesters, how many black people do you think are being killed every single year by police officers? They will give you numbers like a minimum of hundreds, maybe even thousands. Because we think, well, there's probably like 1 million law enforcement officers in some capacity or another. Out of a population of 350 million people, there's probably like 1 million cops. And these million cops, I mean, they're probably having millions of interactions with black people, stopping them, routine traffic stops and whatever. And we know the incarceration rate. We know that millions of black men are being put through the incarceration system. And so the assumption is that out of all these interactions, I'm sure thousands of black people are being killed every year. Of course, that's not true, but that's the impression. And so the explanation is this is completely external, 100% external. Now, of course, I think those numbers are wrong. Obviously, it's closer to 9. It's closer to like 9 unarmed black men killed by police every year, which in the grand scheme of things is not as important as the drug epidemic. It's not as important as the collapse of the black church. It's not as important as the collapse of the black family. So the narrative put out by BLM, the narrative put out by sort of the mainstream professoriate, clearly flawed, clearly incomplete, clearly problematic. But to say then, to go to the other side, to say it's completely internal, to say it's hereditary, that falls flat on its face. And that is just as stupid. Because the idea that we didn't have the Bloods and the Crips 60 years ago, we didn't have crack cocaine in the epidemic it is today, and other similar drugs, not just crack cocaine, but marijuana. And you go down the list of everything, the collapse of the black church, collapse of the black family, these really important things, not police officers, although, look, that's a problem, but it's not at the top of the list. So you go down all these, the problems are linked, so you get a drug problem that leads to problems with the police. You get a marital problem, you get a family problem, you get a church problem, now that transforms into criminal problems. But you just didn't see these problems in the past. And so a purely hereditary explanation makes absolutely no sense. I would say there's flaws with both of these narratives, but at the end of the day, what is the perspective of someone like Charles Murray? Really, the debate here should not be so much over the causes. That's not actually the important debate. That's what everyone thinks. It's, I'm going to have the left-wing professor, and he's going to say it's all the fault of the cops, and I'm going to have right-wing Charles Murray, and he's going to say, actually, IQ is hereditary, and IQ determines everything. I'm mischaracterizing the positions. They're more nuanced than that. But everyone thinks that's the contentious debate, and that's the kind of, it's like we're cats, and that's like the little toy that's put in front of us that we're supposed to be distracted by and argue and think that's the big thing. The college kids think that's important either way. They're either swinging far to the left with it and then a smaller percentage swinging far to the right in terms of that left-right paradigm that they've constructed, which is a false paradigm, because the really important thing here and the ultimate thing that determines what's being done politically in terms of policy is not the causes. The causes are immaterial at the end of it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's due to lead poisoning. It doesn't matter if it's due to whatever you think it's due to. What matters is, what are we going to do about it? And do we care? And this is a crisis, but how are we going to use this crisis? Right? So when you have a crisis, when you have an epidemic, it's an interesting word. When you have a problem, what's the response? What's the reaction? Now, let's say you own a home, and let's say it's in the suburbs, and as you own your home in the suburbs, you're paying off your mortgage, you're investing in it, and then all of a sudden, there's some federal government housing project built next to your neighborhood, and all of a sudden, the crime is going up. And what is your reaction? Your reaction is, this is bad. I don't like this. The value of my home's going down. I don't feel safe. now I need to move. Now I need to sell my home. Maybe I didn't want to sell my home. Maybe I have to sell it at a loss. Or maybe I can't sell it at all because nobody wants to buy a house that's now next to a public housing project. So now I have a problem. I don't feel safe. My family doesn't feel safe. Maybe I am the victim of a crime, or someone that I know is the victim of a crime. My kids are going to a school. The quality of the school is getting more problematic because you've got kids going there who, again, I don't care about the causes. You can say, oh, well, it's all this or that, or maybe they're not getting the right nutrition, or maybe it's because of spanking. There's all kinds of explanations of why kids from bad homes don't perform well in school. But you've got a bunch of kids now from this public housing project going into your school. And what do the teachers have to do? They have to spend 99% of their time and attention on delinquent kids who are fighting, acting up, smoking, drinking, doing the dirty in the bathrooms. They're just up to no good. And so all of the school resources are now sent toward that minority of kids who, as they become the majority, any kind of learning or education becomes almost impossible. At that point, the school is no longer a place for learning, it's a prison. Now, that, as I'm talking about all of this, that's actually happened everywhere in all schools, right? There's almost no school in America at this point, other than some weird, like, homeschooling collective, where the school has not turned into a prison, right? To a various degree. I mean, some of these schools now, it's crazy what they're doing in these schools. But leaving that aside, we're kind of imagining the world prior to 2020, 2019. This is what happens, and people don't like that. And they listen to Bill O'Reilly, and they listen to Sean Hannity, and they listen to Ann Coulter, and they say, this is the Democrats. And the Democrats are building these housing projects, and they're destroying America. They're destroying our homes. They're destroying our schools. We need to stop the Democrats. That is your average kind of middle-class person, lower middle class, maybe even upper middle class, possibly. But I want you to think of the position, the socioeconomic, cultural position of a man like Charles Murray. He is not middle class. And he's not even quite upper middle. He's getting into the upper. He's in the, I would say, the lower upper class. I don't know that he's a millionaire, but he's in the lower upper class. And he can afford to send his kids to a private school, and therefore a lot of those problems disappear. Now I want you to look at the state of California. The state of California, if we're going to talk about race in America, the state of California is one of the least white states besides Hawaii. And so you get all these right-wing people saying, white genocide, white genocide. Okay, well, what does that look like? What does it look like when you say, oh, well, we're going to have a white minority and we're all going to die, they're all going to kill us? What would a world look like with less white people in it? What would America look like if it had less white people, if it had a white minority? It would look like California. What does California actually look like? Are white people being slaughtered in the streets? No. It's not what happens. By the way, that's not what happens in South Africa. That's what happens to the South African farmers because they're a specific class associated with the warrior class. Okay, so if you don't break things down by class, you'll be completely confused because all of the bankers and the politicians and the actors and the athletes and all those people are left alone. It's the farmers who are targeted for a very specific reason, and they're directed. It's not just spontaneous, but it's organized. But in terms of California, you have towns and you have neighborhoods that are 100% white or close to it. Meghan Markle actually grew up in one of these communities, ironically enough. Maybe not so ironically, right, at the end of the day. But Meghan Markle and her neighborhood, and there's these extremely rich little towns and neighborhoods that they have, because affirmative action and Section 8 housing, none of that matters when you're rich. Just like a lot of things don't matter when you're rich. When you're rich, you don't have to deal with bureaucracy. When you're rich, you don't have to deal with the fact that your food is poisoned. You can afford to buy organic grass-fed beef. When you're rich, you can afford to send your kids to a private school. When you're rich, you can afford to have a gated community. When you're rich, you can afford to have private security. When you're rich, you can afford to have, what is it called, home protection services or, burglar alarms. When you're rich, you can afford a lot of things that negate the effect of inner city crime spilling out through Section 8 housing into the suburbs. And so at a certain point, when you have moved up into the upper class, maybe the lower upper class, but when you're in that upper class, when you have a PhD, when you're making $100K a year, when you're at that level where you can afford to send your private kids to school and live in a gated community, you don't really have to worry about that anymore. So the incentives are different. And now you're looking at a country where it's not this selfish, and I'm not saying that in a bad thing, you know, you're not trying to protect your family from inner city crime spilling into the suburbs via Section 8 housing. Now you have a very different outlook, okay? Now you're looking at, we have a country where we have all these different groups who are competing with one another, and we have one group in particular, which is, we could call them historical Americans, heritage Americans. And these are people who are not in the upper class. Maybe they're in the middle class. A lot of times they're in the working class. And these people are losing their social status. And when you look throughout history, rebellions and revolutions, to a large degree, they don't come simply from people who are in the lower class. Rather, a lot of times they come from people who are experiencing a rapid shift in their socioeconomic status, either up or down. So the French Revolution, you had a monarchy that employed a merchant class of bureaucratic tax collectors and other forms of government functionaries to offload all their work on. And then these people said, wait a second, we run the state. Why don't we just take it over? And that's what they did, because the monarchy no longer employed the aristocracy and its own in-group. It outsourced all the functions of power to this, merchant class. And so you had a revolution as a result. But you can also have revolutions if you have a class of people who have a sudden drop in status. You have a people who previously were considered, at a certain station in society, and all of a sudden they drop like a rock. Well, then those people as well are going to feel like they have nothing to lose. That's the theory, at least. You can dispute it. We can describe historical examples. But if you're in the position of Charles Murray and you're saying, well, I'm an upper-class American. I want my stock portfolio to do good. I want my children to live in a peaceful country. Like, I don't want a civil war. I just want the system to continue. From Charles Murray, he is a conservative. He's a conservative American who wants America to keep chugging along. He doesn't want some giant, disruptive, crazy Trumpian thing. And so from his perspective, he's looking at Trump versus Biden. He's saying, who's going to be more disruptive? Who's going to threaten the power structure? Charles Murray is a right-winger. He wants to protect the power structure as it is. And he looks at Trump and he says, Trump is emboldening and he is inflaming existing tensions surrounding heritage Americans who are losing their status in this country, who previously, with the FDR Great Society, well, did he call it? No, his New Deal. LBJ was Great Society. So FDR's New Deal, you had a group of people from the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s who were brought into one of the greatest, most prosperous, most affluent positions that a middle class had ever been in before. As far as the average worker between 1930 and 1960 was brought to an extremely stable, reliable, and comfortable position in society. And since that point, those people their wages have stagnated or they've dropped. And those people have ended up increasingly in desperate positions. Not just, again, it's not purely economical, but it's also religious, the collapse of the church. It's also social, the virtualization of sociality. It's also sexual, the fact that the sexual marketplace has become non-monogamous. Everything is now some form of polygamy, official or otherwise, where the top % of men getting all the women. There's no real reason for a woman to ever settle at this point, because if there's no monogamy, why would you bother settling for a guy who's not going to marry you anyway? Both of the sexes are in a position where they say, well, these girls these days, they don't want to be loyal. And the girls say, well, these men these days don't want to be loyal because everyone is, their sexualization has been virtualized, and therefore monogamy for a lot of people no longer seems like an option that it was prior to high-speed internet pornography. So when you have this collapse, social, sexual, economic, everything, Charles Murray and his cohort is looking at this and saying, this is dangerous. We don't need anybody inflaming the situation. We don't need anybody giving hope to these people. These people need to be kept down. They need to be managed. They probably just need to stop having kids, mix in with other types of people, non-heritage Americans. They need to just kind of go along, get along. And by the way, when I use this term, it's not simply a code word, right? Because you look at African immigration to this country, and when you look at affirmative action, it's not given to historical Black Americans. Black Americans who have lived in this country for almost 400 years are not the main beneficiaries of affirmative action. It's actually African immigrants from Nigeria or who knows where, who have no association really with the historical experience of Black Americans, don't have the same culture, don't even have the same religious background or anything, and oftentimes the two groups don't even get along. And I would actually compare the situation between Black Americans and recent African immigrants. I would compare their relation, their antagonistic relation. They're supposed to be the same race, right? Oh, racial unity. No, that's a spook that doesn't exist in the sense of Stirner, Max Stirner, his sense of that word. So you have these two groups of people. They're supposed to be the same race, but they don't have the same interests, and they're competing. And that's the way I look at these heritage Americans and Charles Murray's cohort, who's this lower upper class, managerial. They don't have the same interests. And so the people who look to Trump and say, oh, Trump's going to save us, he's going to make America great again, he's going to stop Section 8 housing, he's going to save the suburbs, he's going to stop immigration, he's going to stop the crime, he's going to stop the outsourcing and the insourcing of jobs from immigrants, he's going to stop these economic trends, maybe he's going to do something about the sexual problems that we have in this country just by his bravado and setting an example of, he's going to remasculinize men, and he's going to bring back Christmas, he's going to bring back Merry Christmas. All of these things, by the way, are just dog whistles. All these things had no pragmatic, concrete policy shifts, right? Trump did not do anything to return to a traditional Christianity. If anything, he cheapened the name of Christianity. If anything, he made it into more of a joke and more of a laughingstock than it ever has been. In terms of sexual relations, he and his daughter Ivanka promoted, the women in the workplace, which we know that the higher a woman's income is as compared to a man, the more likely divorce. And so he promoted that along. I mean, down the line, you look at every single thing. Immigration, it's not really clear that he fundamentally shifted that either at the end of the day. Those statistics are in dispute. The wall, I mean, all you have to do is build a door in it. So you go down the line, and really Trump, all he did was he profited off politically, and he inflamed tensions through dog whistles, through throwing out, we're going to save Christmas, we're going to be bravado, we don't have time for political correctness, men are going to be men, women are going to be women, we're going to stop immigration, we're going to bring back the jobs. All of these promises that were false promises that didn't really benefit anybody at the end of the day, but they did inflame tensions. They led to a number of street battles. You remember the Battle of Berkeley and the Battle of Charlottesville and the Battle of Capitol Hill and all these things. From Charles Murray's perspective, he's like, we don't need this. You're not even helping the people that you're promising to help at the end of the day. All you're doing is you're emboldening the Chinese and the Russians, and you're making people lose confidence in the government. We don't like this. Now, in the grand scheme of things, I think that something like the Capitol event, whatever you want to call that, protest, whatever, doesn't really matter. You look at that, and I think at the end of the day, all that's going to come out of that is legislation to crack down, to centralize, to give more power to the government, basically a la the Patriot Act, right? So in the final analysis, I think the anxiety that Charles Murray has about Trump is probably misplaced. But still, he's looking at it like, if I'm going to make a calculation, I'm going to say, who's better for me, Trump or Biden? He's going to choose Biden because Trump is just a trouble starter. Trump is a rabble rouser. He doesn't get anything done. He doesn't actually help the people he promises to help. But he does inflame tensions. And the news media loves it, by the way. The news media love Trump because he pumped up their numbers. And that's why they gave him all the attention from the first time that he gave his little speech. I'm running for president. Yeah, they put all eyes on him. They say, oh, well, Trump, he didn't spend as much money as Jeb Bush. Actually, if you look at the money that the news media was spending, making sure that everybody heard his speeches all the time, 24/7, there was a massive amount of money that went into the Trump campaign, and it was funded by CNN and MSNBC and Fox News and all the rest. He had the mainstream media support in that sense. That's what matters. It's who's in front of people. People can only choose who they know. People can only choose what's in front of them. They don't have the ability to investigate and search for another candidate or something like that. They only know who the media puts in front of them. It's ruled by media, and there's a lot of money that goes into that. And that's how Trump won the first time. And, you know, he improved his vote count the second time, and Charles Murray's looking at this, and he's like, we need to cool the tensions. We don't need somebody out there saying these off-the-cuff remarks, riling people up. We don't need that. And Trump is a complicated guy. He is not this one-sided individual. I think he made many attempts to tone down the rhetoric to attract people like Charles Murray. I think he did things, the Platinum Plan. I think he made remarks that I've quoted before. He said, we need more immigration than ever because the economy is so great. This was before March 2020. But he said, we need more immigrants than ever before. So he made attempts to shift in that direction, and he couldn't successfully make that transition. And that's why he lost. He didn't stick with his original plan because he saw how, a lot of people were coming out of the woodwork and they really didn't like his, the government shutdown and all the things he was doing, all the disruptive things, which again, at the end of the day, I think they're superficial. But if you're Charles Murray and you're looking at these things make you uncomfortable. You don't want an unstable United States of America. You want a United States where your stock portfolio is going to continue to increase. You want a United States where your retirement is not going to be dissolved by some kind of, financial crisis or some sort of state collapse. I don't think any of that's going to happen, but from Charles Murray, that's his incentive to vote for Biden. He doesn't have an incentive to vote for Trump because Trump is not even helping the people he claims to help for. And Charles Murray doesn't really care about those people. Charles Murray cares about himself and his cohort and his class of people. And he is this conservative / neoconservative with Bill Kristol and the Never Trumpers and so on. And the Lincoln Project, right? Most Republicans never liked Trump. Kevin McCarthy never liked Trump. Mitch McConnell never liked Trump. Ted Cruz never really liked Trump, to be honest with you. Nikki Haley never liked Trump. Marco Rubio never liked Trump. Jeb Bush never liked Trump. Mitt Romney never liked Trump. John McCain never liked Trump. You understand that when the last two GOP presidential candidates don't like you, that the entire party probably doesn't like you? There are people who sort of made their brand, you got the Tom Cottons and the Josh Hawleys and whatever. That's a minority of the party. Those are junior congressmen or senator. I think one of them is a senator, one is a congressman. People like Matt Gaetz jumped on board that train because they wanted the publicity, because they wanted the votes, because they wanted the fundraising. There's a lot of money in that. And so they hopped on board that. But again, that's a minority of the party at the end of the day. And once Trump is gone, now that he's going to run again in 2024. But for the most part, these people are going to go along with the senior members of the party. That's what the Republican Party is. That's what it represents. That is ultimately what, Mr. Charles Murray represents. The mainstream of the party. And the mainstream of the party said, we'd rather go with Joe Biden at the end of the day. He's not such a bad pick. We can work. Lindsey Graham said, I can work with Joe Biden. And Joe Biden is not an extreme candidate. I know a lot of people say, well, he's going to usher in communism and this and that. I think that there are radical changes coming ahead of us, and I think Charles Murray understands that, and I don't think Charles Murray is a partisan leftist. I'm not trying to say, oh, he's a secret crypto leftist or something like that. No, I think he is concerned about the religion of racial resentment. I think he's concerned about gendered resentment. I think he's concerned about all these disruptive trends that are going to threaten the financial integrity of the United States, the ability of the government to govern. There are military competency, which is really related to, our culture and our mass psychology, because so much of warfare is about morale. It's not just about, your tanks and your bombs and your guns, but it's about, the psychological health of the country in some ways. So I think he is concerned about the Democrats, and I don't think he's thrown in his lot completely with the Democrats. I think he understands, much like many people understand, that we're going to have a huge shift in this country in terms of our social values, cultural values, the way that we view sexuality, the way that we view religion and race. All those things are rapidly changing. I think Charles Murray is uncomfortable with that. But I think in some ways he views it as inevitable because it is not coming from people like him. Charles Murray did not invent this. He's as much along for the ride as anybody else. So he's like, well, if this is what George Soros and Bill Gates and the Koch brothers, if this is what they want to do, then we're just going to have to go along with that. We're going to have to figure out a way to manage this wave. And I think in many ways it's parallel to Christianization, that you had the Roman Empire, went through a massive religious shift, and there are many Roman aristocrats who said, we're not willing to blow up this system in order to save our traditional Roman religion. We'd rather just say, okay, well, Christianity seems kind of like it's inevitable. It's just taking over everything. We'll just go along to get along. We'll try to moderate it. We'll try to, we'll have the Council of Nicaea. We'll sort of edit the books of the Bible a little bit. We'll, insert something in there about give unto Caesar what is Caesar's. Maybe you disagree with that analysis. I mean, maybe you think the Bible is this holy, unalterable thing that came straight from the mouth of God, whatever that means. There was no human intermediaries at all, therefore no possibility for intervention or amending anything or inserting or excluding. Maybe you believe that. But at least I think in the ways that it's presented, most people would agree that the Roman Catholic Church, was invented with many political considerations. It's no surprise that for almost 1,800 years, most, if not 100% of the popes were all from Italian noble families who were descended from Roman noble families. That's just a fact. And you got Pope John Paul, and he was Polish and whatever. You had Pope Ratzinger. That wasn't his technical name, but he resigned. He was German, right? Now you got the one from Argentina, but the one from Argentina even is Pope Francis. He's descended from Italians. He's probably got the same bloodline that it goes all the way back to Rome in any case. So, it's clear that there were a lot of Romans who said, look, there's this new revolutionary religion. It says Jews and Greeks are the same, men and women are the same. Like, there's all this weird stuff in it. We're worshiping this rabbi now. We have to condemn the pagan gods. Like, there's all, from a Roman perspective, it's very sacrilegious. Like, it's a very weird thing from their perspective. But a lot of them say, well, maybe we can moderate this. Maybe we can go along to get along. Maybe we can figure out a way to negotiate this and come to a place where, there's going to be changes, but maybe our civilization doesn't have to collapse. And a lot of people say, well, it collapsed anyway, so, you might as well have just rebelled against it or had some kind of civil war. The problem with that is that the narrative that Rome collapsed is not entirely true. It did collapse in the West, but in many ways it continued in the West. You had the Holy Roman Empire. You had in Russia, they claimed inheritance from Rome. So a lot of these people continued Roman forms of government, Roman forms of law, Roman forms of civilization, the Roman form of Christianity, the Trinitarian form. They really continued that, and especially in the East with the Byzantines. So the narrative of Roman collapse isn't so much about an actual, when they say the Germans invaded and destroyed. No, the Germans invaded and became Roman kings. The Germans invaded and they said, okay, now tell us, how do we have a Roman government? The Germans invaded because they had the military power, because they had been inducted into the Roman the army and used as mercenaries, and so they basically composed the majority of the army at that point. But they said, how do we do your law? The Franks with Charlemagne. He said, I want to be a Trinitarian. I want to go to Rome. I want to get blessed by the Pope as an emperor. So these people were not anti-Roman. In the same way that, when we look at America today as the parallel of the Roman Empire, a lot of the people coming into America are not really anti-American. I mean, the world is Americanizing. As much as people say they hate America, they listen to American music, watch American movies, they imbibe American culture. They speak English to a great degree as a second language. So, I think that the idea that, it's impossible to save Rome, Rome is going to collapse anyway, that's flawed. I think in many ways Rome is still around. I don't think Rome ever collapsed. That's a very black and white thinking. It's a convenient narrative of history that appeals to our simplistic tribal instincts of like, German tribe kill Roman tribe. Now German tribe is Faustian civilization, and or I guess Magian in Spangler's system. It is Magian as opposed to Greco-Roman. It's not so clear-cut as all that. It's actually more complicated. And from Charles Murray's perspective, that's what he's trying to do. He's saying we had an American system, the system is changing. We had a Christian country, that's changing. We have to figure out a way to manage that. And it's not going to be through Donald Trump going out there and saying a lot of inflammatory, offensive things and making random tweets and then trying to backtrack and say, we need more immigrants than ever before, and I love Ivanka, and we're going to bring peace to the Middle East and Saudi Arabia, and we're going to decriminalize homosexuality and Zimbabwe. This kind of bipolarity of Trump's nature where he's trying to appeal to all people at all times, it just makes a mess of the country. Now, is Joe Biden the perfect candidate? No. No, he's not. I don't think from Charles Murray's perspective, I don't think he voted for him thinking, oh yeah, Joe is perfect. Like, I think there could have been a better candidate. The problem is, like, the Democrat Party was not just trying to select the perfect candidate, but they were also trying to select the candidate that fit their interests, as opposed to the interests of Charles Murray. Charles Murray is trying to manage the decline of the United States, of the Christian United States, and to usher in a new period of imperial stability, a Pax Americana, this post-World War II globalism. That's what he's trying to do. And from his perspective, Joe Biden isn't great. But from the perspective of many special interests in D.C., they say Joe Biden is our man. So there's different interests. There's the interests of Murray, who wants the country to do well. And then there's the interests of lobbyists who want to extort the country and steal all the money and sell the uranium to Russia, do all these weird things that you have conflicting factions. People just say, well, it's the deep state. No, actually, there's a lot of... the deep state just means the unelected government that controls the country. The FBI, the NSA, the TSA, all these appointed people, not elected. That's the deep state, and there's many different factions. There's a part of the deep state that wants to go to war with Russia. There's the part of the deep state that wants to sell uranium to Russia. There's the part of the deep state that wants to go to war with China. There's the part of the deep state that wants to increase the rise of China. There's different factions, there's different individuals, there's different identity groups within the deep state that have different interests. And they're competing, and a lot of them viewed Joe as this guy who would just sell out the country in many ways and just give them what they wanted, as opposed to a guy like Pete Buttigieg, who probably would have been a better public speaker, probably wouldn't have made so many flubs, probably would have been higher energy, wouldn't fall asleep as much, would have been able to do regular press conferences and all of those things that, like, it's not great to have an 80-something-year-old man as your president. Like, that's not a projection of state. Of strength, I should say. It is a reminder of the gerontocracy of the Soviet Union right before that thing dissolved. Didn't collapse, by the way. That was a controlled demolition of the Soviet system. But, that's, I guess, the whole thing. We'll keep it under 40 minutes. Hope that answers your question. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.